near a quorum, I don't believe, but we can get started and just not do minutes approval. Is that correct, Sandy?
Sorry about that. I was just on the phone with Phil Klein. I sent him the meeting link. He was having trouble getting in.
Oh, thank you
So
for
he should
that.
be in shortly.
Okay. Well, let's
So-
go ahead and get started. I would like to call the meeting of the LUAC committee to order for September 16th, 2021. I have to read the script about online meetings as part of this, so I will go ahead and do that. Because the COVID-19 pandemic is ongoing, the chair of the Metropolitan Council has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person meeting. Accordingly, the Land Use Advisory Committee members will participate in the meeting by telephone or interactive technology, and this Land Use Advisory Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. So back to the agenda. First up is a roll call to make sure who we have here. So Sandy, if you want to do that.
Sure. We'll start with Abdi Sadhu. No. Jonathan Badema.
I'm here.
Okay. Gerald Bruner.
Here.
All right. Carl Droutning. I believe he will be joining us. He did ask for a link as well. Jennifer Geisler.
Here.
April Graves. Kathy Hemken.
Here.
Noah Keller.
Here.
Phil Klein.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm here.
Yep. Okay, good. Trista Manicastillo. No. Kathy Mokel.
Here.
Steve Morris. Mark Nelson. Mitra Talley. Dan Rowe.
Here.
Courtney Schroeder. All right. Bill Drost.
Here.
And welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Wendy Wolf.
Here. So we do have a
right.
quorum. I would go with the approval of the agenda by consensus. If nobody has any objections, we'll just consider the agenda approved. Speak now if you have a problem with it. Not hearing anything, we'll keep going. Approval of the minutes from the July 15th, 2021 Land Use Advisory Committee.
I don't think we can approve anything without a quorum, period.
We do have a quorum, John.
Oh, we do now?
Yeah.
Man, I
We
must
had
have
enough
dazed
people
off.
come in.
Sorry.
Would somebody like to make a motion for the minutes?
So moved, Hemken.
Thank you. Do we have a second? I didn't hear a second.
Second, bottom up.
Second.
You can pick, Sandy, whether you want Geisler or Bodema for the
Okay,
for
I'll
the
put down
second.
Geisler.
Okay. Any changes or discussion? Seeing none, Sandy, can you call the roll for the minutes?
Sure. We'll start with Abdi Sadhu.
And I think it's the other way. Her name's Sadhu Abdi.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I will make that change. Jonathan Badema.
Yay.
Gerald Bruner.
Hey.
Okay. Carl Droutning. You here yet? No. Jennifer Geisler,
Aye.
April Graves. Join us? No. Kathy Hempkin,
Yes.
Noah Keller.
Aye.
Thank you. Phil Klein.
Yes.
Okay. Trista Matakastila. Still not joined us. Kathy Mokel.
Aye.
Steve Morris. Mark Nelson. Still not here. Mitra. Not here still. Dan Rowe.
Aye.
Alrighty. And Courtney Schroeder. Still not here, it looks like. Bill Drost.
Present.
We're looking for approval of the minutes. Did you just want to abstain since this is your first
Yes,
meeting?
I'll
You know what?
abstain.
Sounds good. And Wendy Wolf.
Aye.
Alrighty, those are approved.
Thank you. And it's not on the agenda, but we do have a new member in the committee, so I figured we'd give him a chance to introduce himself, Mayor Drosty.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm thrilled to be back here. I was on the LUAC committee several years ago and find it exciting. We just completed a decade, so looking forward to the next decade and starting comp guide plans all over.
Thank you. And thanks for stepping in. Vince Workman was in the District 15 spot, but he just didn't have time to attend meetings, so he figured it was better to step back rather than have the position having nobody show up. So Bill was kind enough to step in and finish out Vince's term, and so we're very appreciative of that. And thankful that you're bringing your past experience back to the committee to continue to help us out.
Madam Chair? Just make one comment, since we're the 32nd most desirable city in the country. I'm thrilled to be part of this group.
Thanks.
Madam Chair,
Jerry, what's up?
can I ask the new member where he's from?
Yes, you can.
Excuse me, I'm Mayor of Rosemount.
Okay, nice to
Now,
meet
what I
you.
was referring to is Money Magazine just came out with their best cities, and I should mention Chanhassen is #1.
And Jerry's in Carver County, so
Yes, I knew that.
okay. Let's move on with our work then. Thank you. We don't have any business items, but we do have an information item, which is the release of the 2020 Generalized Land Use Inventory, and Paul Hansen will be presenting to us. Paul, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chair and committee members. I appreciate being invited to come here. I'm thinking back, I don't think I've ever presented to LUAC in the past, which is a little strange since I've been involved with land use at the council for nearly 20 years. So this is a real pleasure, and I hope that I can provide some useful information for you as you're moving forward with your planning for the upcoming year. So, yes, I'm here to just kind of talk about the latest release of the 2020 Generalized Land Use Inventory, and we'll just kind of move right into the presentation. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little background on the land use inventory, if you're not familiar with it, this is something that the council's been involved in for almost since its inception back in the 70s, particularly since the 80s. We've had it in a GIS format. And we do this about every 3 to 7 years, generally about every 5 years. And it's particularly important that we try to hit the decennial census. This gives us an opportunity to have a geographic representation of our region that we can pair up with the demographic information that we gain from the census. So we wanted to do it in 2020, and we succeeded in doing that. The inventory is based off of aerial photography that we fly in partnership with other state agencies and counties around the area. It also uses assessor information, so mostly at the county level, but in Hennepin County, the assessor information comes at the city level. And then we use our own building permit information and internet searches, and also I should just add that it's building upon the last inventory that we did, which was in 2016. Keep in mind that this is a representation of existing land use. So what I mean by that is we're not doing tax classification or necessarily what the assessor says, or what land use guidance is, which is based off of what cities are guiding their land for, the 2040 land use or 2030 as it was before. And it's not necessarily land cover, meaning that there are other data sets out there that do a much better job than we do looking at what's actually on the land, whether it's a wetland or not a wetland, what type of agriculture, things like that. So what we are doing is we're looking, using aerial imagery and trying to assess how the land is being used, regardless of some of these other things that are going on. This is an interpretation that we've done using a generalized uniform classification scheme. I think currently it's, well, I should have this in the back of my pocket. I think it's like 27 categories right now. I could be off on that a little bit. And it has been stable since 2000, meaning we haven't changed any categories, which is really great that we can do some really good trend analysis across the last couple decades. Once we complete our effort, it's done with a group of people, generally anywhere from 4 to 7 people that are working on this at any one time. We invite communities across the region to review what we've graded for their community and get feedback on any changes or suggestions of how we should do it differently. Local communities know their land a lot better than we do. We're just trying to utilize the information that we have at our hands. And we get a lot of good feedback from the community. So I appreciate anyone that was involved in helping us review this past year. And then keep in mind that this is a snapshot in time. It's as of April 2020. We don't update it as land use changes, from day to day or year to year. The next time we make a change to the data set will be likely in 2025. So next slide, please. So why do we undertake land use inventory? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. One of the main reasons that we do this is primarily just to have a good understanding of land consumption and trends across the region. It helps us with our forecasting, regional forecasting and land supply analysis that we do. Primarily every 10 years, but we are working on forecasting throughout every year. It helps us with other regional planning efforts such as transportation planning or some of the special work that we do. One example being the ecosystems or ecosystem services and green space that Ellen Esch did this past year, and I believe she presented to you in May on her findings. It's also involved in our climate work, and I believe both Eric Wojcik and Mauricio Leon presented to you on the climate action plan and the metro climate stats this past year. Sorry, I have email messages popping up, so forgive me here. It's also involved in our groundwater and surface water modeling. We need to kind of know where demand is going to be, what type of demand, and how are we going to meet that. And I believe that Lanya Ross gave you a presentation on water supply also this past year. And of course, as I kind of hinted at earlier, communities themselves use our land use. Sometimes they don't have the resources to do their own inventory, and we make it available for them. It's also used with a lot of other projects and academic research, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe you also had a developers panel, and I would imagine they've been very interested in our land use throughout the years when they look at growth and what's going to happen in the future. So those are just some examples of how this information is used, and the council feels that they play a major role in the region in providing this information. Next slide, please. So just as a kind of how to think about it for you. What I'm going to present is, the idea is you've heard these other presentations. Hopefully, I'm going to kind of give you that land use that everyone's been mentioning about and is impacted by. And it also is a way to think about it. I believe you had the comprehensive plan composite report done earlier in the year, and that's pulling off information from the local communities' comprehensive plans. But this is giving a little bit more information about how the current status of the land is, where a lot of those plans are talking about guidance in the future. So hopefully this will be a nice supplement to that information that you've had. And it'll help inform your work that you're doing in the next year in terms of the Metropolitan Development Guide or new community designations or any other work that you're going to undertake in the future. So hopefully after I get done, there'll be plenty of opportunities, since I'm the only one on this schedule, to have lots of questions and answers. Hopefully I can answer them for you. If not, if it involves additional research, I would certainly be interested in hearing about that, because we have not done everything we possibly can with this information. So yeah, keep that in mind, and we'll go for that. Next slide, please. So just as a teaser, some of the initial findings that we ran across as we compared it to 2016 and earlier land use inventories is, in 2020, we saw an increase in land consumption for the first time since 2005. Now, when I say land consumption, what we're really referring to is new development on either lands that were deemed agricultural in the past, so being either active cultivated lands or pasture lands, or undeveloped lands, which would be lands that didn't have any observable use, whether it be fallow fields, vacant lots, or just kind of undesignated open space. So when I mention land consumption, that's what we're talking about, is that conversion from either prime agricultural land or undeveloped land into an urbanized land use. So once again, we've seen an increase for the first time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Single family detached is the main consumer of land, and this is nothing new. This has been the case for every land use inventory we've done in the past. Shifts in non-residential seem to reflect changes in the economy over the last couple decades, and potentially some shared values that we are having as a region, and we'll talk about that a little bit. As the region grows, so do our parks. Parks are a very cherished commodity in our region, and we continue to enhance those resources in our region. And finally, just as we grow, the region is demanding less land to accommodate the same amount of people and households. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as we go forward. Next slide, please. So just to give you a snapshot, kind of a geographic context, the matrix on the left there kind of corresponds to colors on the map, but not perfectly. When we look at our region, about 30% of the region is still in prime agricultural production. Once again, that's cultivated land or pasture land throughout the area. And another 22% is what we have deemed undeveloped. So this could be fallow fields, vacant lots, or just undesignated open space. River riparian zones or something like that. So overall, combined, over 50% of our region is still in agricultural or unurbanized land uses. Residential clearly makes up the largest component of the urbanized land uses at about 25% of our land. This is all different types of residential, single family detached to multifamily. But 6% is other urban uses. This is commercial, industrial, institutional lands. About 10% is park, rec, and preserve. And another 6% water and 2% transportation. Now, when I say transportation, this is primarily airports, major railroads, so essentially dual track railroads, and major highways. This does not include the road rights of way throughout the region. That percentage would be a whole lot larger, but it's just kind of the way that we define that category when we did land use 20 years ago, and we maintain that consistency. Next slide, please. So back to the findings. As I mentioned, land consumption has increased for the first time, and this chart just kind of shows what we were seeing in terms of a decrease. And I think a lot of that decrease had to do with the mortgage crisis in the late 2000s, and then, of course, the recession in the early 2010s. So now that we're seeing an increase, it's unclear whether this is a trend or whether it's just a correction from those economic downturns that we've had. So we'll kind of have to wait and see what happens in 5 years in terms of this consumption. Maybe it'll stay stable at kind of where we're at now, or it may go up, may go back down. So hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So when we look at the residential construction, which, as I said, is still kind of the main driver or consumer of land, the chart on the left is looking at the breakdown of the residential and other urbanized uses. And you can clearly see that single-family detached is by far the largest consumer at about 2/3 of the whole region. Another 10% is made up of other residential uses, being single-family attached or multifamily, and it also includes mixed-use residential. And only about 25% is other uses such as commercial, industrial, and institutional. When we look at the growth, see a very similar pattern, meaning the change from 2016. So no surprise there. Next slide, we'll see if this works. I think there was some animation on it, but maybe it's not going to go. Did you hit the next slide, Greg? Okay, it did work this time. So one interesting thing of note is about 7% of the whole region, or the land consumption of the whole region, was made up of solar array farms. So these, I think it's about 1,300 acres throughout the kind of rural area of the region, all the way from Scandia and northern Washington County, sweeping down across Dakota, Scott, and Carver County. We saw a significant increase in these solar farms throughout the region. And this is fairly significant. We don't see any one thing kind of occupy that kind of land in a land use inventory other than residential. So, this is probably something, that will continue. It's something we haven't really seen in the past, but I imagine will continue with growing interest in renewable energies and commitment to greenhouse gas reduction. And it'll be something we'll want to watch in 5 years and see what where that takes us. So next slide, please. So where is the single family detached happening? Well, no real big surprise here. Most of this chart's showing you that most of the development is happening in those suburban edge and emergent suburban edge. This is kind of what's expected. This is where land is available to grow, or new land is consumable. And it's where cities are been planning for this development. So there's no big surprise there. But I did want to kind of point out, when we look at the total acres, there seems to be, a fairly significant amount in the diversified rural residential and agriculture. And although in total acres, it does kind of add up, when we think about it in terms of a percent of those regions or those community designations, it's actually a very small percentage of those areas, because they're a much larger geographic area than the suburban edge communities. So not a big surprise here. I think it kind of goes with what we expect to see. Next slide, please. So when we think about the other residential, being the multifamily and mixed use residential, we see a different pattern, of course. Not much that we would be surprised to see here, because these urbanized communities or community designations, you know, have policies where we're encouraging higher densities and looking for maybe life cycle housing options for those communities. But I do find it interesting. I don't know if this is a new thing or maybe has just something we haven't discovered, is, you know, when we look at the acres, we're seeing more acreage in the suburban and the combined suburban edge communities, suburban edge and emergent suburban edge, than we're seeing in the urban center. And I think this is significant. I'm not sure. I would like to go back and look at past land use inventories to see if we see a similar pattern to that. But it seems to illustrate that there's a commitment for these growing communities to provide more types of housing than just single family detached. And maybe that's to accommodate some economic need, or like I said, it might be life cycle housing so that their residents can grow and enjoy their community through their whole cycle of living, from being a first-time home buyer to senior housing. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that as we go forward. Next slide, please. Another kind of important thing for our region, or has been, is thinking about affordable housing too. And so here's the multifamily, but just as a breakdown from market rate housing to affordable housing. And I was kind of surprised to see this too. You know, I think a lot of times the dialogue that I'm hearing, but I'm not really in the planning world, I'm the GIS guy, but you know, that most of this affordable housing is occurring in the urban center and urban designations. But as you can see with this chart, there's a significant amount out in the suburban area too. Now, I will note that we're talking about acres here, acres of development. This is not units. So if we were looking at units, it may be a completely different picture, but still it's telling a story. And I think what I'm reading from it is that it's showing that these suburban communities are embracing, once again, a variety of housing options. And I think that can only be a good thing for our community, our region as a whole. Next slide, please. So let's step away from residential and look at the non-res. There's kind of three big pictures here to think about. The biggest one being kind of that commercial office institutional fall off. That's a very dramatic change from 2005 to 2016, decrease in the amount of acres grown. Once again, I think this is a reflection of those economic turmoil of the late 20s and early 2010s, but we're still seeing a fairly stagnant growth in the last 4 years. I think some of that is, once again, maybe there was because of the economic downturn, maybe there was a supply, an adequate supply that had been built previously that were being filled, so we don't have a new development happening. But I think it's also related to the second story, which is that middle part of the chart, the non-residential mixed use increase. We're seeing a big change, or not big, maybe that's a little overstatement, but we're seeing a repurposing of industrial and flex industrial complexes to accommodate other types of uses, whether it be commercial or institutional or office uses. So I think that has taken up a lot of the slack or the demand that maybe wasn't being built for the office and commercial in those newly converted industrial parks. The third story, which kind of seems at first, we see an increase in industrial, and it seems kind of contradictory to what I just said, that we're converting industrial to other uses. But once again, going back to that earlier slide, that what you see there, that purple segment, is the solar farm development. So nearly 3/4 of all new industrial lands consumed were consumed for those solar array farms in the region. So when we think about that and we were to remove that and we think about the industrial manufacturing and warehousing. It is a much smaller piece. Next slide, please. So to our parks. As I said, we cherish our parks. We love our parks. And we're continuing to see an increase in parks. We added over 10,000 acres in parks since 2016. And this chart, I wanted to show this particularly because I found it very fascinating and a little confusing at first, but basically it's showing single family detached acres alongside park and rec acres by our community designations. And you can see there's a very strong correlation there. And the more I thought about it, it did make a lot of sense. Because as we develop new residential neighborhoods, we're adding new community parks for our kids to play in. We add a new economic center, we're maybe creating new plazas that people can walk around in to enjoy during their lunch hours. And building new commercial industrial complexes, we're adding new preserved lands in the form of stormwater retention basins or something to that effect. So, you know, thinking about it, it's like as we develop, we cherish our park and open space that we are incorporating it into our developments as we go forward. And I think this will continue as we go into the future years. One thing that isn't really clear on this chart is, and that I wanted to bring up, was about golf courses. Golf courses are included in the park and rec, but what we are seeing is a loss in golf courses. This is a trend that's been going on for the last 3 land use inventories. We lost almost 1,000 acres of golf course since 2016. This is on top of 500 acres that were lost between 2010 and 2016. Why the closures? I can't say for sure, but you know, there may be economics behind the expenses of running these things, but it may also be market pressures that the landowners can make more money by selling it and redeveloping it. It may also be communities, some communities are running out of land, and to accommodate their growth needs, they're looking at entertaining the opportunity of redeveloping these large parcels. What we have seen is those that have developed, it's primarily with residential and park or open space lands in there. So yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say on that. So next slide, please. So the final point was this land consumption. It's suggesting that we're having more compact development, less sprawl. When we look at the amount of land consumed, once again, this is land that was ag or undeveloped and now has become an urbanized use of either residential or commercial or industrial, something like that. We are consuming less land while adding the same amount of residents and households to the region. So what this is really kind of suggesting is that part of our growth as a region is redevelopment, not just new consumption of land. And as we, you know, as more people are coming in, we're having higher densities in the urbanized areas that were already developed. We have redevelopment. You look at the downtowns, you know, we have all this new housing going in. So a lot of that new growth for the new residents and households are happening in those redevelopments. And that's a piece that we haven't been able to really look at yet very much. It's a much more complicated story or thing to look at and tease out in the trending, but certainly something we want to look at. So, but this is, I think this reflects our regional plans that we have, and also the local plans that are coming out through the comprehensive plan. So I think this will be a trend that we will continue to see in the future. And finally, the next slide, just to kind of go over those main takeaways again. So as I said, we are seemingly consuming less land to accommodate our growth, that last bullet point, but we are seeing an increase in the land consumed. So kind of an interesting mix of things there. Single family detached is still the main consumer of land, and that will continue into the future. Non-residential changes seem to be reflecting a lot about the economy in the last 2 decades, and it'll be interesting to see in 5 years if there are changes or shifts in what has happened there. And I think it also kind of is a change in the values. And when I say values, I'm partly thinking about that conversion of industrial lands to bring in more mixed uses in an area. It also is maybe accommodating higher densities in urban areas, and then also talking a little bit about kind of those solar arrays, and that this is maybe something that we I know there may be issues with these solar arrays, but in terms of the idea of reducing greenhouse gases and thinking about reducing energy consumption, these are certainly reflecting on that. And then finally, the last point, just about our parks. Even though we are growing, we are also adding more parks to the region and conserving more land in parks and open space. And I think as a community or a region, we will continue to cherish that, and that'll be part of our growth in the future. And with that, I will end the presentation and entertain questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions or comments from committee members?
Chairwoman Wolf.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Hey, Paul, thank you again for the presentation. One of the questions I had was around specifically that park growth, and just when I look at still I understand the suburban edge, you're driving a lot of it, but how do I think about the lack of growth in the urban center and urban? Is that already because there's just not enough land to develop the parks? Is that there's already existing amount of acreage to cover the need, or it just felt like there was a significant amount of multifamily or growth there, but not so much on the park side?
Well, thank you. That's a great question or a great point that should be made. That chart was looking at new park land. So if we were to actually add up all parks or when I say new park land, it's things that weren't parked before that are now, since 2016. So why it's small, I would imagine it is partly what you just said, that there's limited land available. There's already, things are already developed. But I think it is promising to see that there is still growth in those areas, because as land is made available, we are considering adding that. There's the whole Mississippi River waterway. The park implementing agencies are continually looking at adding new parkland to their systems. So when I think what's driving the growth that you're seeing is more this development of the suburban communities and the addition of the playgrounds of the area. But if you have a specific, like if there's a specific research you want to do about parks, that may be something that we could provide additional analysis on. Maybe the park unit could provide more information about that and how much acreage is actually in those areas than I can provide at this point. But I think you're right on that it's just a limited amount of space that can be converted to park without tearing down something at this point.
Well, I was the council's representative to the Parks and Open Space Commission for many years, and Minneapolis and St. Paul are adding land to their parks. Minneapolis, much of that is along the Mississippi River, where they can find somebody to sell them the land. And St. Paul has acquired some trail areas and little bits on the edges of some of their existing parks, but it's really, really expensive. Where you can spend $1 million to get a giant piece of parkland out in the rural areas. That $1 million doesn't buy you very much when you're in Minneapolis and St. Paul, because the land is so expensive there. But they are putting a lot of effort into reimagining the park space that they have and making it more relevant and updating it for today's users, and also rehabilitating things that might be kind of old in those park areas. If that helps answer your question, Courtney.
Well, and I'd like to just add on to that, if I may, it'll be interesting to see in 5 and 10 years with the Ford plant development and the Hillcrest Golf Course. I mean, yes, that was already Park and Rec, but it's going to be redeveloped, and it'll be interesting to see what portion of that will remain in a park and setting for the local residents. So.
Did that answer your question, Courtney? Just a second. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to add that one of the things that happens, of course, with new development is the platting of the lots, and usually associated with that in most communities is park dedication, which is either actually dedicating land for park in that subdivision or providing dollars to help purchase more parks. So it made sense when I saw that correlation between new housing being developed, especially in those outer suburbs, and seeing the parkland sort of correspond with that. But I would agree with the observations that have been made about the more urban and urban core areas.
And there are some large areas in the agricultural portions of the region for regional parks. Whitetail Woods Regional Park just came online, and that was a farm that is now a huge regional park. And Scott County has been acquiring a lot of land along the Minnesota River for future regional parks also. So that bump that you see in the agricultural portion is probably acquisition for future or recently created regional parks.
Madam
Anybody
Chair?
else?
Madam Chair,
Okay, before Jerry, somebody else said Madam Chair. Who
It was
that?
Jenny.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Thanks. I just had a question, and I apologize if I missed it. I didn't see anything necessarily about kind of the shift in designation from urban center to, rural center. Have there been communities that have had designation shifts, or land that you started to say, no, that's now not suburban edge, it's suburban? Have those designations changed, which changes the overall makeup? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I understand your question. This project does not really, it's not really about the community designations. I just use that as a framework to talk about, acres or what we're seeing, just so you can get a sense of where things are happening.
Yeah,
The concept that you're talking about will come out through the next regional plan and working with the cities and the system statements, and as we identify, this will be an input into that process. And,
okay, so maybe a follow-up to that was in the difference you had talked about over time. So I was just wondering if there's the same categorization baseline used for the, when we're
so
talking.
once again, the comparison is looking at the land use designations themselves, not the community designations. The community designations, I just use their current location as a framework between.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Yep.
Jerry?
yes, hi, say, tell me if I'm wrong, the most low-income housing is being developed within the inner cities, is that correct? And it's
I
like,
can't.
like suburb a little bit.
Yeah, I can't really answer that. What I was showing with the affordable housing is there is acreage being developed in anywhere from the urban center to the emerging suburban edge. How many units that is, I cannot say. If we were to actually look at units, it could be that, 50% of them are in that urban center. That would be something that the housing folks at the council would have to answer.
Okay, well, that wasn't really my question. My question really is, Carver County is the fastest growing county in the metro area. So these folks are coming from somewhere. Rumor has it they come from suburbs, other suburbs. They like Carver County because there's more space. and parks and trails and everything. However, there's a big resistance in Carver County for low-income housing. So my question really is, do you think the resistance comes for the people that are moving out here don't want it because they had it where they lived, or they just don't want it? I mean, you got to have low-income housing everywhere. You got to have places for people to live, to have jobs. But there's big resistance here in Carver County. I would just like your opinion on that, if you could.
Well, I appreciate that opportunity. However, I am out of my element. I think what I saw, I mean, I have a limited knowledge on that subject really, but what I did see when we just kind of looked at the multifamily, I just kind of compared that with the affordable, the areas that we had defined as new multifamily. I then compared it to our affordable housing information that we had, and that's where I got that number. Or acres. I just identified it, and they're saying there is affordable housing here. The social constructs, I can't say. I think it's a good sign that we're seeing it in these suburban edge communities, that they're developing it. But I think I would leave that to our planners that are on board, if any of them want to chime in and provide more information about that. I'm sorry, I can't provide more for you, sir.
Questions, comments from other?
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Bill, did you just raise your hand? Go ahead.
Yes. Just curious, with the emergence of solar, I think it was 7% of the land that was consumed. Do you see a long-term risk? If I recall, I think most solar projects are 25, 30-year commitments, maybe even longer, as far as that land's out of use for production. If it would double and triple in the next decade, do you think we could potentially be creating some long-term problems in our 7-county urban area regarding how we consistently contiguous development?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that. However, just from my observation is where, and I don't have a map that shows that. I apologize. I mean, I have one, but I don't have a part of the presentation. Is most of these are still quite a bit of ways from the developing edge of the urbanized area of the city. I know there was one or two in your city of Rosemont. Yes. And there are a few around Farmington and a few others, but the majority of them were further out in areas that we do not have plans right now to provide sewer service or anything in the next 20, 30 years. So my feeling would be is that overall we are not localized. There may be some situations, maybe for your community, it may be a localized concern. And yeah, I think that's, something, a discussion with the utility companies. I'm not sure how that whole process works. And we do have a person, Cameron Bailey, at the council that is heavily involved with working through opportunities for solar. And he might be able to provide more information on that.
And that's maybe a good topic for future discussion. Cameron has spoken to this group before, and I'm sure he'd be willing to come back again. That's been something that I've thought about a lot too, in that you're taking good farmland out of production, and we should be preserving our farmland for farmland. And places like the wetland buffers, might be a better spot, or I mean, on top of buildings is the best spot because you're using spaces that wouldn't otherwise be used. But the utility companies seem to really like putting them in a square on a piece of nice farmland rather than putting them in, a couple rows along the upland buffer from a wetland area from a farm or something, you know, that couldn't otherwise be used for crops. And some farmers are putting lower crops that you don't need to drive tractors and such on there, so they can still use the land. But it does seem like a pretty big issue if we're going to actually value our farmland for its ability to be farmland. So thank you for bringing that up.
Just one comment there. I was in part of Phoenix several years ago, and they had the solar panels above a stormwater catch basin. So in other words, you're utilizing its dual service and it's land that's not developed anyway.
Good point.
So just opportunities, but that would require developers to work with power companies and long-term contracts, and it could get quite complex, but to your point, there may be better areas.
Oh, and our wastewater treatment plants, both the Blue Lake and the Empire, have solar arrays next to the wastewater plants. And that's area that is our buffer so that we're not bothering our neighbors. So there is no, you know, development that's being prevented from happening. Although theoretically we could grow crops by the Empire plant if we wanted to. Angela, did you have something you wanted to say? I saw you turned on your camera.
I did. Thank you, Chair Wolf. I was just going to offer that we could certainly follow up and have Cameron provide some additional information. I know that when Paul presented that finding, that particular finding, Cameron's eyes lit up a little bit and wanted to dig in some more. So he and Paul may have some additional analysis to do before that happens, but we're happy to follow up.
That would be great. And I would like to find out why they want to do them on, you know, a flat piece of farmland rather than on the unfarmable areas, if you guys can find out.
Chair Wolf, if I could just follow up, I know that there are initiatives as well to install solar panels on closed landfill areas as well. So that may be something that Cameron could touch on as well.
The challenge is getting close enough to the infrastructure for the connecting them, since landfills are usually kind of isolated. Great. Other comments, questions? Here's your chance to ask for research. You got a researcher here volunteering his time. Anybody?
Well, I will say if you know, hard to think on the spot, but if you do come up with some idea, we'd be more than happy to hear it and think about whether that's something we can try to answer for you. So as you're going forward, please keep that in mind.
Thanks. Thank you for the presentation. Any other thoughts, questions? Giving you one more chance. Staff have any announcements or questions or things they want to tell the committee? Looks like
Nothing from us today.
Okay, great. Looks like we're going to get done a little early, which is, I guess, nice because we've been running our meetings right at the 2 hours and having to sort of cut things short to stay under 2. So I appreciate having the extra time that we could talk about whatever we wanted to with this. And thank you everybody for showing up today and for your input, and we will see you in 2 months. No further business coming before us. This meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.